The sun shone brightly over Oakwood Community Park on a warm Saturday afternoon. 12-year-old Amara Jenkins played with three friends near the colorful playground. Her dark curly hair bounced as she jumped from the swing at its highest point, landing gracefully on the soft wood chips below. The other children cheered. "That was amazing," Amara called her friend Zoe, clapping her hands. Amara smiled and brushed off her blue jean shorts. She had always been athletic, something her father encouraged since she was little. Speaking of her father, she checked her watch. She still had 2 hours before she needed to head home for dinner. On the other side of the park, Karen Whitley walked her small white dog on a pink leash. She had moved to Pinewood Heights just 3 weeks ago. The neighborhood's reputation for safety and excellent schools had attracted her, along with the well-maintained properties and strict community guidelines. Karen noticed the group of children and frowned. The park seemed too loud today. She pulled her sunglasses down slightly, watching as Amara and her friends shared a bag of chips, laughing about something on one of their phones. "They shouldn't be making so much noise," Karen muttered to herself. She tugged her dog toward a bench where she could keep an eye on the children. Something about them bothered her, especially the girl with the curly hair. Karen hadn't seen her around the neighborhood before. After 20 minutes of watching, Karen's irritation grew. The children had moved to the monkey bars, where Amara showed off by doing a full flip. When a wrapper from their snacks blew across the grass, Karen stood up. "That's it," she said under her breath. "This is a respectable neighborhood." She marched toward the group, pulling her dog along. The children didn't notice her approach at first, busy with their games and conversation. "Excuse me," Karen said sharply. "Do you live around here?" The children turned, surprised by the sudden question. 3 of them, all white, looked at each other uncertainly. Amara stepped forward with a polite smile. "Yes, ma'am. We all live nearby." Amara gestured to her friends. "Zoe lives right across the street there. Tyler and Emma are from the next block." Karen ignored the other children and focused on Amara. "I didn't ask about them. I asked if you live here. I haven't seen you in this neighborhood before." Amara's smile faded slightly, but she kept her voice steady. "I live on Maple Street, about 3 blocks that way," she pointed east. Karen's eyes narrowed. Maple Street was certainly part of the neighborhood, but it was an older section with smaller homes. "This park is really meant for residents of Pinewood Heights proper." Tyler, a freckled boy with red hair, looked confused. "But Amara is a resident. Her dad." "It's okay, Tyler," Amara interrupted quietly. She'd been in situations like this before and knew how to handle them. Her father had prepared her. "We're not doing anything wrong," Amara explained calmly. "The park is public." Karen pulled out her phone from her designer purse. "I think I'll let the police decide that. You children are being disruptive, and I saw you littering." "That was just one wrapper that blew away. We were going to pick it up," Emma protested, her voice shaking. "And we weren't being loud," Zoe added. But Karen had already dialed 911, turning slightly away from the children as she spoke into her phone. "Yes, hello. I need to report some teenagers causing a disturbance at Oakwood Park. One of them doesn't seem to be from this neighborhood, and they're vandalizing the area." Amara sighed and sat down on a nearby bench. She wasn't scared, just disappointed. She took out her own phone and sent a quick text. The other children gathered around her, worried and confused. "Should we leave?" Emma whispered. "No," Amara said with a strange confidence that surprised her friends. "Let's wait. It's going to be okay." Karen paced near the park bench, her small dog circling around her ankles as she waited for the police to arrive. She kept glancing at Amara and her friends, who had moved to sit at a picnic table nearby. The children spoke in hushed voices, occasionally looking in Karen's direction. "Can you believe this?" Zoe whispered to Amara. "We weren't even doing anything wrong." Amara shrugged, trying to appear calm though her heart beat faster than normal. "It's happened before," she said simply. Her friends exchanged worried glances. 10 minutes passed before a white police cruiser with blue stripes pulled up to the park entrance. Karen straightened her blouse and walked briskly toward the vehicle, eager to speak to the officers first. 2 police officers stepped out of the car. Officer Rodriguez was young with a kind face. His partner, Officer Bennett, was older with gray hair at his temples. They both wore the navy blue uniform of the Pinewood Heights Police Department. Good afternoon, ma'am. Officer Rodriguez greeted Karen. We received a call about a disturbance. Karen pointed dramatically toward the picnic table. Yes, officer. Those teenagers over there have been causing problems, especially that one. She pointed directly at Amara. I don't believe she lives in this neighborhood, and they've been littering and making too much noise. Officer Bennett looked toward the children, then back at Karen. Those children, they look pretty young to be teenagers. Well, they're old enough to know better, Karen insisted. I've lived in this neighborhood for. She paused, remembering she was new. Well, I'm a homeowner here, and I know what belongs and what doesn't. The officers exchanged a quick glance before Officer Rodriguez spoke. We'll talk to them. Could you wait here for a moment, please? As the officers approached the picnic table, Amara stood up. To Karen's surprise, both officers smiled at the girl. Hey, Amara, Officer Rodriguez said casually. Everything okay? Karen's mouth fell open. They knew her name? Hi, Officer Rodriguez, Officer Bennett. Amara replied. We were just playing in the park. That lady over there called the police on us. She said I don't belong here. Officer Bennett frowned. Did she now? From where she stood, Karen couldn't hear their conversation, but she watched with growing confusion as the officers chatted comfortably with the children. Officer Rodriguez even laughed at something Amara said. After a few minutes, Officer Bennett walked back to Karen while Rodriguez stayed with the children. Ma'am, those kids aren't causing any problems that we can see, Officer Bennett explained. They're just enjoying the park, which is public property. Karen crossed her arms. That girl doesn't live in this neighborhood. I'm sure of it. Amara, Officer Bennett raised an eyebrow. She lives on Maple Street. That's definitely in this neighborhood. Maple Street is hardly, Karen began, then stopped herself. How do you know where she lives? Before Officer Bennett could answer, Amara's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and smiled, then showed it to Officer Rodriguez. He nodded and spoke into the radio on his shoulder. What's going on? Karen demanded. Are you going to ask them to leave or not? Officer Bennett sighed. No, ma'am, they have every right to be here, but someone else is on their way that you might want to speak with. 5 minutes later, another police vehicle pulled into the parking lot. This one was different, newer, with the words Chief of Police written on the side. Karen smiled with satisfaction. Now she would get results. Someone with real authority had arrived. The vehicle's door opened, and a tall black man in a crisp police uniform stepped out. The gold badge on his chest caught the sunlight. His face was serious as he surveyed the scene, eyes landing first on Amara, then moving to Karen. Officer Rodriguez approached him immediately. Chief Jenkins, thank you for coming. Chief Jenkins, Karen repeated quietly, a strange feeling growing in her stomach. The police chief nodded to both officers, then looked toward the picnic table. When he saw Amara, his stern expression softened just slightly. Daddy, Amara called out, waving from where she sat. Karen's eyes widened in shock. Daddy? The ground seemed to shift beneath Karen's feet as Police Chief Marcus Jenkins walked past her without a glance and headed straight for his daughter. Chief Marcus Jenkins walked with purpose toward the picnic table where Amara and her friends sat. His uniform was perfectly pressed, the badge on his chest gleaming in the afternoon sun. At 45 years old, he carried himself with quiet authority that came from 15 years on the force, the last 5 as chief of police. Karen stood frozen, her small dog now sitting quietly at her feet. She watched as Chief Jenkins reached the picnic table and placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder. Are you okay, sweetheart? He asked Amara, his deep voice carrying across the park. Amara nodded. I'm fine, Dad. We were just playing. Chief Jenkins looked at each of Amara's friends. Zoe, Tyler, Emma. You all doing all right? The children nodded, clearly comfortable with the chief's presence. Karen's face had turned pale. Officer Bennett stood beside her, watching her reaction. That's Police Chief Marcus Jenkins, he explained, though by now it was obvious. Amara is his daughter. I didn't know, Karen stammered. Her confident posture from earlier had completely disappeared. Chief Jenkins spoke quietly with the children for another minute before turning toward Karen. His face was calm but serious as he approached her. Officer Rodriguez followed a few steps behind. Ma'am, Chief Jenkins said as he reached Karen, I understand you called the police about some children in the park? Karen couldn't meet his eyes. There was a misunderstanding, I thought. I mean, they seemed to be. They seemed to be what, exactly? The chief asked. His tone wasn't angry, but it was firm. Too loud, Karen finished weakly. And I thought I saw them littering. And did you approach them about this concern before calling 911? Karen nodded. I asked if they lived in the neighborhood. All of them, or just my daughter? Karen's silence was answer enough. Chief Jenkins sighed and gestured toward a bench away from the children. Let's sit down for a moment. Karen followed him to the bench, her legs feeling wobbly. Officer Bennett stayed with the children while Officer Rodriguez positioned himself nearby, giving the chief and Karen some privacy while remaining within earshot. My name is Marcus Jenkins, the chief began once they were seated. I've been chief of police here for 5 years, before you moved into this neighborhood. How did you know I just moved here? Karen interrupted, surprised. Small town. Chief Jenkins replied simply. And I make it my business to know what happens in Pinewood Heights. As I was saying, before you moved here, we worked hard to make this a community where everyone feels safe. That includes children playing in the park, regardless of what they look like or which street they live on. Karen looked down at her hands. I didn't mean to cause trouble. Did you know that calling the police for non-emergencies ties up resources? Chief Jenkins asked. While my officers were responding to your call about children playing, they could have been handling actual emergencies. I thought it was important, Karen mumbled. Important enough to potentially put a child at risk. The chief's voice remained level, but his eyes held intensity that made Karen shrink back slightly, because that's what happens when people call the police on black children who are just existing in public spaces. From the picnic table, Amara watched her father talking to the woman. Unlike her friends, who seemed nervous about the whole situation, Amara appeared calm. She had seen this before. Her father always handled these situations with the same measured approach, not angry, but unwilling to let the moment pass without education. I didn't think of it that way, Karen admitted after a long pause. Most people don't, Chief Jenkins replied. But I need you to think about it now. My daughter is 12 years old. She's lived in this neighborhood her entire life. This is her home. As they continued talking, Amara's friends gradually relaxed. Officer Bennett had started showing them pictures of his new puppy on his phone, making them laugh. What happens now? Karen asked, looking up at Chief Jenkins. The chief studied her face for a moment. That depends on you. This could be just an uncomfortable encounter you try to forget, or it could be a moment that changes how you see the world. Karen glanced over at Amara, seeing for the first time a child rather than an intruder. The weight of what she had done began to settle fully on her shoulders. Karen sat on the bench next to Chief Jenkins, her mind racing. The bright afternoon sun now felt too hot on her skin. She glanced over at Amara and her friends, who were still chatting with Officer Bennett. The children's laughter made her stomach twist with shame. I never meant to, Karen began, but found she couldn't finish the sentence. What hadn't she meant to do? Call the police on a child for simply existing in a public space. Make assumptions based solely on appearance. Chief Jenkins waited patiently, his hands resting calmly on his knees. Unlike many men in positions of authority, he didn't feel the need to fill silence with words. I'm sorry, Karen finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. I appreciate that, Chief Jenkins replied. But I'm not the one who deserves the apology. He looked meaningfully toward the picnic table where Amara sat. Karen followed his gaze and felt her chest tighten. The idea of facing the young girl after what she had done felt impossible. I can't just go over there, Karen protested weakly. You found the courage to confront a child you believed was doing something wrong, Chief Jenkins pointed out. Surely you can find the courage to admit when you've made a mistake. Karen nodded slowly. He was right, of course. She stood up on unsteady legs and walked with the chief toward the picnic table. Officer Rodriguez followed at a respectful distance. Amara looked up as they approached. Her expression was guarded but not hostile. She was used to this, the careful face of a child who had learned too early how to navigate other people's prejudices. Amara, Chief Jenkins said gently, Maze. Whitley, Karen supplied. Karen Whitley. Ms. Whitley has something she'd like to say to you. Karen faced Amara directly, fighting the urge to look away. I'm sorry for making assumptions about you. I shouldn't have called the police. It was wrong of me. Amara studied Karen's face for a moment before responding. Thank you for apologizing. The simplicity of the response made Karen's eyes well with tears. She had expected anger, accusations, or at least a lecture like the one the chief had given her. Instead, this 12-year-old girl was showing more maturity than Karen had demonstrated all afternoon. Would you like to join us? Amara asked unexpectedly, gesturing to the empty space at the picnic table. We were just talking about the community festival next month. Karen looked at Chief Jenkins in surprise. He gave a small nod of encouragement. Yes, I'd like that, Karen replied hesitantly. As Karen sat down, So scooted over to make more room. Officer Bennett excused himself to return to his patrol duties with Officer Rodriguez. Chief Jenkins remained standing, watching the interaction carefully. The community festival is my dad's favorite event, Amara explained to Karen. He helps organize it every year. It brings the whole neighborhood together, Chief Jenkins added. All parts of it, not just Pinewood Heights proper. There was a gentle emphasis on the last few words that made Karen blush. I don't know much about it, Karen admitted. I just moved here from Boston. It's the best day of the summer, Tyler chimed in. There's music and food trucks and games. Last year, Amara's dad organized a dunking booth to raise money for the community center, Emma added with a giggle. All the police officers took turns getting dunked. Chief Jenkins smiled at the memory. The things we do for community relations. As the conversation continued, Karen felt something inside her begin to shift. The neighborhood she thought she had moved into, exclusive, pristine, and homogeneous, wasn't real. The actual community was more diverse, more connected, and more welcoming than she had imagined. Chief Jenkins checked his watch. I need to get back to the station, but I'm glad we had this chance to talk, Miss Whitley. He turned to Amara. Dinner at 6, sweetheart. Don't be late. I won't, Dad, Amara promised. As Chief Jenkins walked back to his vehicle, Karen watched him go with newfound respect. He could have used his position to humiliate her or escalate the situation. Instead, he had turned it into a teaching moment, not just for her, but for the watching children as well. The next morning, Karen woke up feeling uneasy. Memories from yesterday at the park kept replaying in her mind. The look on Chief Jenkins' face, the calm maturity of his daughter, and the shocked expressions of the other children all haunted her. She had slept poorly, tossing and turning as she imagined how differently things could have ended. Karen made herself a cup of coffee and sat at her kitchen counter, her small dog, Bella, curled up at her feet. Through her window, she could see families walking to the community church down the street. Some faces she recognized from her brief time in the neighborhood, but many were unfamiliar. She wondered how many other assumptions she had made about who belonged here. After finishing her coffee, Karen made a decision. She changed into a simple blue dress, put Bella on her leash, and headed out for a walk. She wasn't sure exactly what she planned to do, but staying inside with her thoughts felt unbearable. Karen walked slowly down Maple Street, the road where Amara lived according to yesterday's conversation. The houses here were smaller than in her section of the neighborhood, but they were well maintained with colorful gardens and children's bicycles in many driveways. It was clearly a family-friendly street. As she turned a corner, Karen stopped suddenly. Ahead of her, Chief Jenkins was washing a car in his driveway. He wore jeans and a t-shirt instead of his uniform, looking like any other dad on a Sunday morning. Amara sat on the front steps of their house, reading a book. Karen considered turning around, but Bella barked, drawing attention to them. Chief Jenkins looked up, and recognition flashed across his face. He nodded politely in her direction. Taking a deep breath, Karen approached the house. Good morning, she said, her voice smaller than usual. Morning, Ms. Whitley, Chief Jenkins replied, still holding a soapy sponge. Out for a walk? Yes, Karen said. I wanted to apologize again for yesterday. Amara looked up from her book, watching the conversation with interest. Like I said yesterday, apologies are important, Chief Jenkins replied. But what's more important is what we learn from our mistakes. Karen nodded. I've been thinking about that all night. I realized I don't know my neighbors at all. She glanced around the street. Any of them? Chief Jenkins put down his sponge and dried his hands on a towel. Not knowing your neighbors is common these days. What matters is being open to getting to know them now. A woman came out of the house, carrying a tray with glasses of lemonade. She was tall and elegant, with the same warm smile as Amara. "Marcus, who's this?" she asked, setting the tray down on a small table. "Diana, this is Karen Whitley. She recently moved to the neighborhood," Chief Jenkins explained without mentioning yesterday's incident. "Ms. Whitley, this is my wife, Dr. Diana Jenkins. She teaches at the university." "It's nice to meet you," Karen said, extending her hand. Dr. Jenkins shook it warmly. "Welcome to Pinewood. Would you like some lemonade? I always make too much." The simple gesture of hospitality after everything that had happened yesterday brought unexpected tears to Karen's eyes. "That's very kind of you." "Join us," Amara suggested, moving over to make room on the steps. "Dad was just telling me about the new community center plans." Karen hesitated, then accepted a glass of lemonade and sat down beside Amara. Bella settled at her feet, surprisingly comfortable in the unfamiliar setting. "The community center is getting a complete renovation," Chief Jenkins explained. "We're adding a new library section, a computer lab, and expanding the recreation areas." "That sounds wonderful," Karen replied. "Is it nearby?" "Just 3 blocks from here," Dr. Jenkins said. "It serves all of Pinewood Heights, including the newer developments where you live." The conversation flowed easily as they discussed the neighborhood, local events, and the upcoming community festival. Karen learned that Dr. Jenkins led the festival planning committee and that Amara played clarinet in the middle school band that would perform. "We always need volunteers for the festival," Dr. Jenkins mentioned casually. "Since you're new to the area, it might be a good way to meet people." Karen found herself nodding. "I'd like that. I have experience organizing charity events from my previous job." "Perfect," Dr. Jenkins smiled. "We have a planning meeting on Wednesday evening at the community center, 7 o'clock. As Karen finished her lemonade, she felt something shift inside her, a wall beginning to crumble. The neighborhood she had chosen for its exclusivity was showing her a different kind of value. Community. Wednesday evening arrived faster than Karen expected. She stood outside the community center, clutching a folder containing ideas she had jotted down for the festival. Her stomach fluttered with nerves. What if people already knew about what happened at the park? What if no one wanted her help? Taking a deep breath, Karen pushed open the glass doors and stepped inside. The community center was larger than it appeared from outside, with a main lobby that branched off into various rooms. A colorful sign pointed the way to Festival Planning Committee, Room 103. Karen followed the sign down a hallway decorated with children's artwork. When she reached Room 103, she paused at the door. Through the window, she could see about 15 people seated around tables arranged in a U-shape. Dr. Diana Jenkins stood at the front by a whiteboard, speaking animatedly. Before Karen could gather her courage to enter, someone tapped her shoulder from behind. "Going in?" Chief Jenkins asked with a small smile. Like her, he was dressed casually in jeans and a button-up shirt. "I'm a little nervous," Karen admitted. Chief Jenkins nodded. "That's natural. But Diana is looking forward to having your help." He reached past her and opened the door, gesturing for her to enter first. All eyes turned toward them as they walked in. Dr. Jenkins brightened when she saw Karen. "Everyone, this is Karen Whitley," Dr. Jenkins announced. "She's new to the neighborhood and has experience with event planning. Karen, welcome to the chaos." People around the room laughed and waved in greeting. Karen recognized a few faces from her street, but most were unfamiliar. She noticed that the group was diverse in age and background, much more so than she had expected in this neighborhood. "There's a seat next to Amara." Dr. Jenkins pointed to an empty chair. To Karen's surprise, Amara was there, sitting beside an elderly woman who was knitting while listening to the discussion. Karen made her way to the empty seat. "Hi," she said softly to Amara. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Mom says I need to learn community responsibility," Amara replied with a slight eye roll that made her seem very much like a typical 12-year-old. "Plus, I'm in charge of the kids' games section." The elderly woman beside Amara leaned over. "I'm Beatrice," she whispered. "I've lived here 40 years. Don't worry about all this, it always looks like chaos, but Diana runs a tight ship. For the next hour, Karen listened as the group discussed everything from food vendors to musical performances. Dr. Jenkins managed the meeting efficiently, assigning tasks and addressing concerns. When the topic of fundraising came up, Karen cautiously raised her hand. Yes, Karen? Dr. Jenkins encouraged. At my previous job, we had success with corporate sponsorships for community events, Karen explained. I still have some contacts who might be interested in supporting the festival. The room fell quiet for a moment. Then Dr. Jenkins broke into a wide smile. That would be incredible. Our budget is always tight. I could make some calls tomorrow, Karen offered. Chief Jenkins, who had been quietly observing from across the room, nodded appreciatively. That kind of support could help us add the children's bounce house we've been wanting to include. Bounce house, Amara exclaimed, suddenly more interested in the meeting. Several people laughed. As the meeting continued, Karen found herself assigned to the fundraising committee alongside Beatrice and two others. When Dr. Jenkins finally called an end to the meeting, people lingered to chat. Karen was surprised when several members approached her to introduce themselves. We've been trying to get corporate sponsors for years, said Michael, a young teacher from the local elementary school. If you can help with that, you'll be the neighborhood hero. I'm just glad to help, Karen replied honestly. As people began to leave, Amara appeared at Karen's side. Are you really going to help get a bounce house? Karen smiled. I'll certainly try. Cool, Amara said simply. Then, after a pause, my friends and I are going to the park again on Saturday. You should bring Bella to meet us. The simple invitation, offered without hesitation or grudge, touched Karen deeply. She glanced across the room, where Chief and Dr. Jenkins were watching the interaction with supple smiles. I'd like that, Karen replied. Bella would love some time at the park. As Karen left the community center that evening, she felt lighter than she had in months. The neighborhood she had chosen for its prestigious address was offering her something far more valuable, a chance to belong. 3 weeks passed quickly. Karen threw herself into festival planning with unexpected enthusiasm. Her corporate contacts came through with sponsorships that doubled the event budget. The entire committee was thrilled, especially when they could now afford not only one bounce house but 3 different inflatable attractions for the children's area. On a warm Tuesday afternoon, Karen sat at a coffee shop near the town square, reviewing vendor applications. The bell above the door jingled, and she looked up to see Chief Jenkins entering in his uniform. He spotted her and, after ordering his coffee, walked over to her table. Mind if I join you for a minute? He asked. Please do, Karen replied, clearing space on the table. Chief Jenkins sat down with his coffee. Diana tells me you've been a tremendous help with the festival planning. Karen felt her cheeks warm at the praise. It's been nice to use my skills for something meaningful. In my old neighborhood, I was on the Homeowners Association, but all we did was enforce rules about lawn height and fence colors. Chief Jenkins smiled slightly. Rules have their place, but they're not what builds community. He took a sip of his coffee before continuing. I wanted to ask you something, if you don't mind. Of course, Karen said, setting aside her paperwork. The police department is starting a new community engagement program. We're looking for residents from different parts of Pinewood to join our advisory board. He studied her face carefully. I think your perspective would be valuable. Karen was stunned. My perspective? After what happened? Especially after what happened, Chief Jenkins replied. Look, Karen, we all make mistakes. What matters is how we learn from them. You've shown real growth these past few weeks. I don't know what to say, Karen admitted. You don't need to answer now. Think about it. Chief Jenkins handed her a brochure about the program. Our first meeting is next month. After the chief left, Karen sat for a long time, staring at the brochure. The old Karen, the one who had moved here seeking exclusivity, would never have considered working with the police on community issues. But she wasn't that person anymore. Saturday morning arrived with perfect weather for the community festival. Karen arrived at the park at 6 a.m. to help with setup. The grounds were already buzzing with volunteers erecting tents, arranging tables, and hanging colorful banners across the entrance. Karen, Dr. Jenkins called out, waving from near the main stage. We need your help with the sponsor banners. For the next few hours, Karen worked alongside other volunteers, many of whom she now knew by name. When Amara arrived with her friends to set up the children's game section, she greeted Karen with a high five. "The bounce houses look awesome," Amara exclaimed, pointing to the inflatable attractions being set up across the field. By 10 o'clock, the festival was officially open. Families streamed through the entrance, children tugging parents toward games and activities. Karen manned the information booth, answering questions and directing visitors. From her station, she could see Chief Jenkins in uniform near the police department's safety demonstration tent. Around noon, Beatrice came to relieve Karen for a lunch break. "You've been working since dawn, dear. Go enjoy the festival." Karen wandered through the grounds, taking in the sights and sounds of the community celebration. Food vendors offered everything from barbecue to ice cream. Local artisans sold handmade crafts. On the main stage, a jazz band played while people danced on the grass. Near the bounce houses, Karen spotted Amara and her friends helping younger children with the games they had organized. She watched as Amara patiently showed a small boy how to throw beanbags into colorful targets. "She's good with kids," a voice said beside her. Karen turned to see Dr. Jenkins holding 2 cups of lemonade. She offered one to Karen. "Thank you," Karen said, accepting the drink. "And yes, Amara is amazing. She has so much patience." "Gets that from her father," Dr. Jenkins replied with a smile. "Speaking of which, he told me about the advisory board invitation." Karen nodded. "I've been thinking about it. I'm going to say yes." "I'm glad," Dr. Jenkins said. "Change happens when people get involved." She gestured around at the festival. "This is what community really looks like, all of us together, differences and all." As they stood watching the celebration unfold around them, Karen felt a sense of belonging she hadn't expected to find when she moved to Pinewood Heights. The neighborhood she had chosen for its address had given her something far more valuable: a place to grow. 1 year later, Karen stood on her front porch, watching movers carry furniture into the house across the street. New neighbors were arriving today. She had baked a welcome cake and prepared a folder containing information about Pinewood Heights, local services, community events, and important phone numbers. "Ready?" Amara asked, appearing beside Karen with Bella on a leash. At 13 now, Amara had grown taller over the past year, her confident personality shining even brighter. "Just about," Karen replied, checking her watch. "Let's give them another hour to get settled before we go over." Karen and Amara had developed an unexpected friendship. What began as awkward encounters had transformed into a genuine connection. Every Saturday, Amara walked Bella while Karen was at her yoga class. In return, Karen helped Amara practice her clarinet pieces for band concerts. "I saw the moving truck has Florida license plates," Amara noted. "I wonder if they have kids." "I spotted some bicycles being unloaded," Karen said, "so maybe." They sat on Karen's porch swing, watching the activity across the street. Bella curled up at their feet, content in the warm afternoon sun. "Remember when you thought I didn't belong in the neighborhood?" Amara asked suddenly. The question wasn't accusatory, just curious. Karen felt the familiar flush of shame but nodded. "I do. I was a different person then." "Dad says people can change if they want to," Amara replied thoughtfully. "He sees it all the time in his work." "Your dad is a wise man," Karen said. "The police advisory board has taught me so much about this community, the real community, not the one I imagined when I moved here." The advisory board had become an important part of Karen's life. The monthly meetings brought together residents from all parts of Pinewood Heights to discuss community police relations. Chief Jenkins led the discussions with the same calm authority he showed in all aspects of his work. "Mom says you're nominated for the Community Service Award this year," Amara mentioned. Karen laughed. "Your mom shouldn't be sharing committee secrets." After the successful festival, Karen had continued volunteering. She now coordinated the community center's tutoring program 3 evenings a week, matching high school volunteers with younger students who needed help. The program had grown to serve 50 children from across Pinewood Heights. "You deserve it," Amara said simply. "You helped more kids get access to tutoring than ever before." Across the street, a moving truck pulled away. A family stood in the driveway: a man, a woman, and 3 children who appeared to range from about 5 to 15 years old. They were black. Karen watched as the family looked around at their new neighborhood. The mother seemed to be pointing out houses to the children, probably explaining who their neighbors would be. The oldest child, a teenage boy, didn't look particularly thrilled about the move. "Shall we go say hello now?" Karen asked. Amara nodded eagerly. "Yes, I want to tell them about the community center activities for kids." They crossed the street together, Karen carrying her cake and information folder, Amara leading Bella, who trotted happily beside her. As they approached, the family turned toward them with cautious smiles. "Welcome to Pinewood Heights," Karen said warmly. "I'm Karen Whitley from across the street, and this is my friend Amara Jenkins." "I'm David Wilson," the man replied, extending his hand. "This is my wife Teresa and our children Marcus, Zoe, and little David. We brought you some information about the neighborhood," Karen explained, offering the folder, and a cake, of course. Teresa Wilson accepted both with a grateful smile. "That's so kind of you. We were worried about the move. Our realtor mentioned that this area is, well, not very diverse." Karen finished for her. "It's changing, and those of us who live here are working to make sure everyone feels welcome." "My dad is the police chief," Amara added proudly. "He makes sure everyone is treated fairly." The teenage boy, Marcus, looked slightly more interested at this information. "For real? The chief is black." "For real," Amara confirmed with a grin, "and he's hosting a basketball tournament at the community center next weekend. You should come." As they continued chatting with the Wilson family, Karen reflected on how much had changed in just 1 year. The woman who had called the police on a black child for being in her park was now welcoming a black family to the neighborhood and truly meaning it. Later that evening, as Karen walked Bella before bed, her phone rang. It was Chief Jenkins. "I hear you've met our new neighbors," he said. "News travels fast," Karen replied with a smile.